In Between is a game that piqued my curiosity from the moment I saw it. Now here was a game dealing with life, loss, grief, and all its stages, presented as a puzzle platformer? What? My eyebrow thoroughly raised. I picked it up and played through it, and was happy to see that the game was every bit as clever as I hoped it would be. I'm not talking about puzzle difficulty, I'm talking about taking the weighty topic of death and cancer and translating that into a medium that at first glance couldn't possibly convey anything about it. Or could it? Let's find out. The plot of In Between is about a man who is dying from cancer. It begins with the man walking out of the hospital and through the stages of his life, from childhood to the present, and we are presented vignettes, snapshots of his life, captured and narrated for us. But what is important about these scenes is not the scenes themselves, not what they portray, but how the protagonist sees them now.
I've always had a problem showing my thankfulness. I can't fathom what Linda and Mama have done for me. I can't pay them back. They deserve better.
All these moments are tied together by a single stream of consciousness that passes through them and views them through the lens of his impending death. Regrets become embittered by the knowledge that he will never be able to address them, and happy moments are clung to and cherished, even as he doubts if he had even done enough for the ones he loves. The game progresses through the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, and the scenes presented and his attitude to them are tailored by the current theme. For instance, denial sees him question his fears, the reality of the situation, and his relationship with his father. His father was emotionally distant throughout his childhood, burying himself in television and distractions, to blind himself to what he didn't want to see. As the protagonist progresses through denial, he comes to understand his father and why he behaved that way, as he sees himself doing the very same things in reaction to his cancer. Each stage reveals more about him, about his life, and how he sees it now, at the end. Even the parts he's not proud of. Throughout anger, he struggles with anger towards his family for outliving him, and getting to have the life that he can't, and the anger at himself for feeling these things. In Between doesn't shy away from ugliness. It presents a simple but very honest portrayal of the protagonist's feelings and emotions. It doesn't whitewash or romanticize him coming to terms with his end. It recognizes that it can straight up suck. The characters presented warts and all. His hopes, his fears, and his shame are all laid bare, and for that I have huge respect for the game's narrative. It doesn't go into heavy detail about any particular part of his life, but it doesn't have to. It shows us slivers of his life. But by giving us honest access to his feelings about those moments, it slowly colors in the portrait of him that it's been creating. Although the protagonist is never named, by the end of the game we have a clear picture of who this man is. It achieves this elegantly, by giving us just the pieces we need to understand him as a person, and not drowning us in exposition. But what really completes the storytelling, what pushes the story from good to great, is the game mechanics. I expected In Between to be a puzzle game that had some serious themes thrown in, and I was super wrong. The mechanics actually hold the meat of the story, and I'm about to spoil literally everything, so if you're interested in this game, pause the video, go and play it, and then come back. The way the mechanics influence the story and influence you as a player is something that is best experienced by playing it. Each stage of the game, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, introduce new mechanics, the purpose of which is to tie your actions and how you feel playing the game directly to what the protagonist is going through at that time. And the way they did it made me understand and really respect their decision to present this game and their story as a puzzle platformer of all things. Denial is represented by these great walls of darkness, often encroaching from multiple sides. These walls only grow if you turn your back to them, so every level has the player acknowledging these walls, staring straight at them to drive them back, because running from them will only make things worse. Anger introduces great red orbs that move around the stage, leaving the player to work out how to navigate their way around these points, these triggers that can consume them with wrath and destroy everything. Sometimes the player can actively move these orbs, taking control of the anger and creating for themselves a way to move forward without giving into it. Bargaining is, in my opinion, the best and most clever of the mechanics. Instead of having just one avatar to control, you suddenly have two. The kicker is, these avatars are controlled simultaneously, but have different courses that they must follow. At first you're struck by how easy the stage is compared to what you've done before, but then the other person falls into spikes and dies, because you are only considering the viewpoint of the main character. In each of these levels, you have to constantly take both people into account, because what might work for one of them will destroy the other. Only by finding a solution that works for both parties can they connect. And even when they're so close they're almost touching, it can be hard to stop them from just running around in circles. Depression uses mechanics that are in many ways the opposite of anger. Instead of avoiding the bright spots, now you must stick to them. These points of hope are all that shelter you from the dark, all that stop you from giving up. You often have to cling to these points for dear life, following them through the level, and be at their mercy as they push you through dangerous places, or huddling by them for safety as they wax and wane. Often you have to create new points of hope, without which it will be impossible to continue. Timing is even more important here as well, because sometimes if you try to pass through a space just as hope begins to wane, when you're doing something you might have done 100 times, but it just happens to be a particularly bad day, you can suddenly find yourself caught off guard as depression consumes you. Finally, acceptance is the simplest but possibly most poignant of the mechanics. The levels here are basically empty. After the stress and the difficulty of the previous stages, suddenly you can just walk straight to the exit. It's right there. No danger, no worries, no giant death fields to dodge. You can just go and go and go. It doesn't take you long to realize that you're going in circles. And then you realize that one of the levels is different. One of them has spikes. This is where the whole rest of the game comes to a head. These spikes are the things that you've been working so hard to avoid for the whole game. These are the things that have caused you so much frustration, so much pain, had you trying again and again from 100 different angles to try to find a way where you wouldn't fall onto them. And now you realize they're inevitable. You can't stay here forever. You as the player have to accept that the only way forward is through the spikes. Through the very thing that you've been taught this whole time is to be feared, to be avoided. But now you have to let go of the rules you've been taught. Just as the protagonist has to accept that he will eventually lose the things he loves, that he will eventually die, you as the player have to accept that these spikes, this fail state, is not really a fail state. It's just something that has to happen. It's such a powerful moment, such an emotional barrier to cross, and In Between pulls it off with just the mechanics of the game, with only the rules that he has already established. The metaphor works so well, and even if it can only approximate what it would feel like for someone to be actually in that situation, it does so much with the tools that it has to work with. It's such a good example of the gameplay actively telling the story, of moving the player, integrating with the plot and emotion of the game, rather than just being a vehicle or a bystander to it. I came into In Between with a healthy dose of curiosity, and that curiosity was amply rewarded. It is so well done and so clever that they managed to tell such an emotional story through such an unconventional method in a way that only a game can. Leaves me greatly respecting their work here and keen to find more games like it.